Hello, Jacob. How
Hey,
are
how are
you?
you?
Very good,
Good.
man. Thanks. Yeah. How are you doing?
Doing great.
Awesome. So, Jacob, you've been doing software for quite some time, and maybe you could, introduce us to what have you done? What is Focus Dev, and what do you do these days?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been developing software for a couple of decades now. I actually started developing when I was an intern in college, and even before that, I was actually building software at my house, when I was 15 years old, on an old Packard Bell PC.
Oh, wow,
So,
nice one.
it got started pretty young.
What was that? Was it Basic, or what would you use back then?
No, actually, I was building with Pascal back in those days.
Pascal.
So
Yeah.
if you remember that language. Now,
Yeah.
it wasn't very useful for building software products, but it was a good learning language, right? It kind of
Hmm.
gets you started. And then the language I actually jumped to after that was Perl, if you remember Perl, which was kind of a scripting language.
That's still popular, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
some
like for
people use Perl.
scripting,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
in
some
the
people still
basements,
use.
etc.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I think that's where it's still popular, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was really actually where I got my web start was in Perl. So I
Mm,
was building CGI scripts with Perl, and then
mm,
a framework that was built called Mod Perl, which allowed you to
yeah.
build more scalable systems with Perl than
Mm,
what CGI offered. So, but yeah, so I started there and then got into consulting, and I've been consulting now for about 15 years. So that's kind of been the direction of my career was initially working full time for organizations and then realizing that I really wanted to be able to have different experiences and work with a variety of domains and different types of clients and technologies. And that's really driven the direction of what I wanted to do.
got it. So you've been in the market for, let's say, for 2 decades. So I'm
Yep.
guessing you've seen ups and downs from a software guy's point of view. So what's your take on that? Like if there's a guy that's coming in or a gal that wants to start the software development as a professional, from your experience, what would be the tips and tricks you could share from your years of experience, how they can survive, for example, in these are certain days that we have today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, anybody who's going into software, the first thing I try to say to them is don't do it unless you really enjoy learning along the way.
Mm,
Because if you're not the type of person who likes to constantly be learning, you're going to struggle in the software field. It's just very hard to find that job. Years ago, I think that companies like take a JC Penney, for instance, that was
mm,
around for multiple decades. You might be able to get into a company like that, which was a client of mine, and stay there for 30 years building on the same technology. But the likelihood of you seeing, your salary continue to increase the way you want and building the career you want, it's going to be challenging, right? You're going to run into some difficulties there along the way because technology's changed, and
mm,
it's just the way it is. You have to evolve with it. It's very similar to musicians, right? The way musicians are is the ones that have been successful and the bands that continue to be popular over time are the ones that reinvent themselves over the years, right? They talk about that all the time. They change with the sounds and with the new things that come into popularity, right? They're
mm,
constantly reinventing the way that they write music and the musical compositions that they create. So you have to do the same thing in software to stay relevant and
mm.
stay, interesting to others within the field. So I think that's the key thing you have to remember is that if you want to get into this field, you really have to be focused on being willing to learn and have a career full of learning.
Mm.
Um, but to that effect, the first layoff I went through and what kind of got me into the mode of really being focused on taking control of my career was I went through a layoff when I was just a college intern, which was kind of a weird experience, right? When you're in college, you kind of look at that job and you're like, well, a job, once I get set, it's great, right? I'll be working for a company. I've got a salary coming in. I don't have to worry anymore. They're taking care of me, right? And it's kind of like a family situation. But I realized quickly, I came in to the industry as an intern during the dot com boom And when telecom companies were just kind of blowing up, right? You had your Cisco, you had your Alcatel and Nortel. And I'm actually located in the Dallas area. So I went to school at UTD, which is in Richardson, right there in the telecom corridor. So these companies were huge. They had their big buildings there. And UTD was just sending interns over there to get jobs. And it was great. You could go in there and learn a lot. I mean, there was a lot to be learned. And that's kind of where I got started with Perl. That's where I learned the language, was doing that. But then the telecom bust happened whenever the .com boom ended, because the companies just no longer needed to buy all of this equipment to host all these websites and keep the growth going within the IT field. Yeah. So working at Alcatel at the time, which is where I was interning, they actually laid off the entire department that I worked in, and it was a weird experience, right? I never even knew that layoffs existed before that happened. I didn't even know that was a thing. And I got a call from my manager. I was actually at school, so it went to voicemail, and I called him back on my flip phone at the time, right? Back before smartphones, and gave him a call, and he said, "Well, you don't need to bother coming in today. They've closed down the department. They're letting go of the building. The lease is up at the end of a couple months, so done. That's it." In a panic, I remember rushing over to the office where they basically talked to interns and got you set up. And they said, don't worry, we'll get you somewhere else, because I needed a job. I was making money from this, right? It's kind of funding my college career doing this internship. And so they got me in somewhere else. But it was a weird experience, right? It kind of taught me a lesson early on. And I think those lessons are important, that people learn, that a job is not necessarily safe, right? I think we're seeing that a lot right now in the tech field, with all these layoffs between Google and what's Meta, Microsoft. Even though they're seeing huge profits, they're still laying people off, and that's just kind of the name of the game. It's all about keeping the company earning the expectations of the shareholders, right? And bringing the money in that they want to bring in. And it's a management decision at the top. So you just can't rely on those positions always being there, and you need to keep yourself current. So keep learning, keep working, keep building your career. What about you? I mean, what's been your experience in that area?
So touching on what you said right now, what I've learned was this job stability discussion that happens in different circles. It's an interesting one because I've seen many people say that having these permanent jobs is actually secure. Right. And I think what's more secure from my experience is what you said, staying relevant. That's right. Keeping up with the markets. And what naturally comes with that is probably you eventually just become a consultant, and you go freelancing or contracting, depending on which country you're in. So what happens is, instead of a false security of the job where you have a permanent contract, which can be ended tomorrow if the department gets redundant, at least you have the skills to be decoupled from any of those layoffs, because actually people are looking for you, not the other way around. So I think what you started with, staying relevant and learning all the time, that's going to help you avoid these situations with uncertainty. But yeah, when it comes to what I've learned over the years as a software consultant, I think that the top thing I've learned was that keep on learning and don't be afraid to fail. So kind of what you're saying, plus you're going to be failing all the time with different things. Just keep on learning, don't give up. And on top of that, I would also stack up that I notice a lot of there's groups of software development professionals that focus a lot on local maximums. So they're going to be perfectly designing codes, running perfect codes, deploying them in a perfect way, but that software is not going to be making money for the company. And we got to think about what is what is the purpose of the code you're writing. So if you're an artist, the purpose is the thing you're creating. So if you're an artist, software developer, perfect code's good enough. But most of the time, you're getting paid by the company to deliver results for the client and also profits for the company. So what I notice is that a lot of developers maybe have problems switching from this software development mindset to a bit of a consultant mindset and thinking about the bigger picture.
That's right.
And yeah, trying to step away, leave the comfort zone a bit and the lines of code, and think about, what am I doing actually here? How do I fit into this bigger organization, and how I can deliver value? And I think a lot of us do it, but I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe we could do it earlier, right? You can start year 3. Don't wait for year 10 to kind of naturally be pushed there by the company. You can start looking at those things earlier. I don't know, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I always tell people, whether they're in software or they're the business or whatever it is, for software developers, delivery is the moment we create value, right? Up until that point, we're just a cost to the organization. And that's all there is to it. So focusing on that delivery and making sure that you're not only consistently delivering, but consistently delivering something that's useful to the business is key and critical. If you're not, then they just look at you as something that, can be cut, right? I mean, you're not creating that value, and you're not building, something that is bringing in profits to the organization. So why do we need you, right? So always make sure you're focused on that delivery. And I think that's a big problem for teams as well. Teams struggle with that, and they, especially teams that don't look at things from an agile perspective, and they're not focused on continuously delivering software, but instead working through, more of a waterfall oriented process where they're taking a big bang approach to software and building something, up until, working for 6 months, going away, and then finally coming back with, what they think is the eventual solution. That's a big problem for you, right? You haven't delivered any value. You've just been a cost to the organization for 6 months. And then what you deliver at the end of that period, do you know that that's actually correct, right? Have you verified this by actually getting any feedback from the user base and making sure that what you're building is actually what they want? No, you haven't done that up until this point. So now you're sitting on, 6 months of cost to the organization and hoping and praying that what you're bringing to them is actually going to meet their needs, right? I think it's a very risky endeavor on your part.
I think that's the word, right? Risky. Yeah. Because you're betting the 6 months, a team's effort, and you might get a great outcome, but as we've learned over the past 3 or 4 decades, most of the time it's not what what you're hoping for.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the idea of this, fixed price contract based approach to software, it's just an illusion. I mean, even if you, let's say you do get the software exactly right? Let's say that I somehow miraculously, I built the requirements exactly as they were stated. It works right. There's no bugs. And I came in within budget. Well, the users really didn't know what they wanted in the first place, right? Is what you're going to find out.
Yes.
What they wrote is not exactly what you're delivering, and it's not what's going to deliver value to the business, right? They just haven't quite figured out what the users really need, and that's going to come through feedback, right? And the only way to get that feedback is to put it in front of them, to be delivering continuously, looking at, okay, I've built this little thing. Now let me put it out there. Let me see what they think. Let me see if it's actually useful to them, because maybe it's not. Maybe it's something that you need to completely pivot and move in a completely separate direction is often what you find out. I mean, it's not that this happens sometimes, it's that this happens a lot. And that's where the risk comes in.
Yeah, I think that was the whole point of the Agile Manifesto as well, right? The guys realized that there was these projects that were taking 2 years, and there were a huge, half of them never delivered anything, but let's say half of them delivered something, but that was never useful for the users actually, because there were so many assumptions made that were incorrect, and times change, and there was a lot of smart guys that tried to figure out what to do about it, came up with some vague recommendations that seemed to actually work, right?
Right. That's absolutely right. Yeah,
so what would you do? How would you approach this in a team? Let's say we've got a team that actually there's very focused on producing great codes, and they're doing TDD microservices, they're doing hexagonal architecture. They're using all the latest architectural solutions, and they're using the latest tech, but they're not looking at the bigger picture, how they fit into the organization. They're not talking that often to the product people or the organization people. And how would you approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the challenge is number one, helping the team to transform from a team that just looks at technology to a team that looks at the business, right, and is focused on the business itself. And a lot of that comes from, number one, having a true understanding of the product vision, right? You really need to have a clear understanding of, number one, what is the problem statement for your product, and that really is the product vision. What are you trying to solve? What problem is your focus for this product that you're building? Because if you don't know that, how do you really make progress, right? I mean, where do you start, and how do you determine if something's high priority or not that you're working? So really, to me, that's number one, is figuring out.
So starting with this North Star, putting out the pole, this is where we're going,
Absolutely.
guys. Okay.
Yep. I mean, that's the number one. Now, number two, a team that's working like this, you need to look heavily at their backlog. And that's often a big problem, because they may be prioritizing things that are more technology focused versus business focused. And they really need to look at what are the features that are going to be, going towards that guiding light, right? And meeting that product vision. We need to be really focused on making sure those are well defined, and everything that's in the backlog actually has some value to meeting that eventual goal of solving our problem statement.
So I think that's an interesting word you mentioned here, value. So what's your experience measuring value? How would you, assign value to different backlog items, for example? What have you seen work, or what have you seen that doesn't work?
Yeah, so value is really based on, some type of measurement, right? You need to be able to determine, if I develop this, what cost is it going to save, or what revenue is it going to bring in? Those are your measurement tools, because everything else doesn't matter to the business, right? I mean, if you talk about efficiency is great, but you better be able to put a number on it. I mean, that's all there is to it. I don't care if you're scaling a system better if it does nothing for us. If our user base is 122 users, and yes, we may have a viable product with 122 users if they're paying quite a bit of money to use that product, but how far do I really need it to scale, right? So don't tell me that we need to, focus on microservices and take this monolith into a microservices approach if you really don't have the need for it, right? We need to be focused on what's going to actually bring in money or save us money, right? That's all there is to it. And you can do that in a number of different ways, right? If you're looking for cost-cutting measures, either the feature is going to save money for somebody who's like in the customer service department, or somebody who's working in accounting or whatever. It's going to save them time to be able to focus on to other things. So it's saving salary dollars that you can then equate to a cost savings within the company. Or perhaps, you're spending money on some type of asset, and you can completely eliminate that asset by building your own software system, right? Maybe you've got a CRM tool or something like that that you can replace by just simply implementing this small feature. That's all that you're really using that for. I've done that for many organizations, right, where they've had a purchased product, and simply by building this very easy tool, because they were only using one feature set of that purchased product, and this purchased product was costing them $1 million a year. And they were able to eliminate that entirely by just creating this feature set out of open source tools and replace it entirely, right? And eliminate that cost. So those are ways that you can determine, hey, these are going to be cost savings. Now, revenue coming into the company, that's a little harder to determine, just because you don't always know how something's going to perform, right? So yes, you may add in this new system, and it may, drive new customers coming in, but how do we really know how many customers are going to buy into that and want to use it? You have to have some type of either A/B testing, some way of looking into when it goes out, is it really making the impact that we thought? And do it in increments, right? Focus on smaller features and see, what the uptake is on those small features. Look at, okay, when you release this little thing, is somebody actually using it? And you can release different versions of it, like I said, with A/B testing, and say, okay, which version of that, page or that, that little component within the page or whatever it is, which version is having the biggest impact, how many users are using it, is it causing subscriptions to, kind of flow through? Are subscriptions coming through faster? Whatever the case may be, you need just some way of measuring and making sure that it's actually performing the way you want.
So how would you approach these conversations? Let's say there's a team of developers, they're doing their microservices, TDD, and everything else that's great, which is cool. But then you've got product people or somebody from the executive team, and those guys or girls are frustrated because features are not going as fast as the new challenger startups or whatnot. How would you approach that?
Yeah. So the challenging thing is that when you're building software, and I often tell this to my teams, is that building trust is more important than building software. And those in management and those that call the shots really are not going to trust you if you're not delivering things that are bringing value to the organization. And so you really have to work on with the team of helping them to understand what builds trust, right? And building that trust is really winning. It's just like in sports. I always like to use the sports analogy, right? Because if you've got a team that's lost 10 games in a row and they're in last place, nobody trusts that team, right? They're the worst team in the league. I hate that team. I don't want to be a fan of that team. I don't want to buy their memorabilia. I don't want anything. But as soon as they start winning, and especially if it's an unexpected win, right? They deliver something, they deliver a win that, nobody thought they could get. All of a sudden it's like, wow, okay, maybe they're turning around. Maybe let's start rooting for this team. Let's see if they can win some more, right? Let's give them another chance. And so, you need to really focus in on, number one, I tell the teams, hey, look for the best bang for your buck thing that you can deliver, right? Look at everything that they're asking for and say, okay, that thing right there, they're really excited about it. And we could finish that in maybe a couple of weeks. Let's deliver it, right? And keep doing that, right? Tackle these little things that you think are big wins for your team that don't necessarily take as much time as they might be thinking it would.
But what you're saying is those are big wins in the eyes of the stakeholders, actually, like the product people, the executive team, the guys that you want to build trust with. They see certain areas as, oh, we'd love to have that. We see this could deliver a lot of value to the company or to the clients. And if the team focuses on that, they start building trust with those guys because they can suddenly see that there's progress. And what you're also saying is don't look for something that's going to take a year to deliver. Look for something that you can build a small increment of trust so that you can maybe take bigger risks later on. That's what I'm hearing. Or
yeah, also. That's absolutely the case. Yeah, you're right. And that's really key, right? Is that you have to build back that trust. And then once you build back that trust, then you can start taking more risks over time. Because if your team, has been looking like a failure for this long, the lack of trust isn't just from, the organization itself. It also starts to build up within the team. Nobody wants to be a scapegoat, right? And so developers are going to, they're going to only want to take the easy stuff. They're only going to want to focus on what they're good at. People aren't going to want to make product decisions. If you're the product owner, you're going to be like, well, I let me think about that for a while, because they don't want to be on the chopping block whenever they come down and say, who's at fault for what's happening within this team, right? Everybody starts to mistrust each other. And you have to get those little wins to start with in order to get everybody on the same page and kind of working together again, right? Thinking about, we can be successful. I know we can. So let's work at that, and let's continue to get these big wins. And then, like you said, your point to taking bigger risks later on, that's absolutely possible, right? Once you've built up that trust and the team trusts itself, and the management looking from the outside in, once they have that trust, everybody's like, well, yeah, sure. If y'all want to take this on, if y'all think this would be valuable to the organization, go for it. We know what you've been delivering to us. You're delivering constant value. Now we'll give you that chance.
Makes sense. So we're kind of touching on these projects that would be failing, right? So one of the areas that you could define a failure of the project is the management, executive team, or the product team. They're not happy with what's being delivered to the customers. Any other areas of failing projects or buckets of failing projects you have seen? that you could share with
Yeah,
us?
sure, absolutely. So actually, the most difficult project I came into that was failing was it was a project that had been going on for 3 years, and it was kind of rebuilding the entire infrastructure underneath how a retail company handled their items and their skewing and all of that. And it was a challenging project. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It was working with existing legacy systems that actually ran on AS400, if you remember what that is, if you worked with those kind of systems in the
I
past.
haven't actually with this one specifically, no.
Yeah, it's an old IBM mainframe system,
Okay.
AS400. So there was interfacing with AS400, and there was a lot of complexities involved in building out this
So
system.
were they kind of refactoring the architecture, or were they actually building something on the side for 3 years?
It was an entirely new system that was dedicated to handling how their skewing works and their product associations and sending it out to. It's kind of the central point for all the other systems and how they identify items and they bring in items and they send them out to all the other systems like marketing or within the retail stores.
Got it.
It was basically the central point for everything.
But
So
would they switch some traffic to that system like in the first year, or was it
yeah,
not working yet? I'm missing
right.
that
So
bit.
everything had been built on AS400. And so the existing item system that did all of this was all this, old legacy system, and they needed to get off it because they were continuing to having to vertical scale, right? And it was costing the company a lot of money to, constantly build these, new server stacks to host, the AS400 system that they were working with. So
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to be able to horizontally scale it through new technologies and then also continue to have interactions with the old AS400 legacy systems behind the scenes. So
Mm.
there was a lot of moving parts in place to do this. And today they were still okay working with that, legacy system, but they needed the new system to be put in place, and they would migrate over through, either the old interfaces that we were going to back or through new interfaces for the newer systems that were being developed. So it
Okay.
was, it was a migration that would happen once the new product was in place.
Okay.
So the challenge here is that 3 years had gone past, right? They had made virtually no progress, and this system was kind of
And
flooding.
when you say no progress, you mean there's no customers using this new system as part of their customer journeys or something like
Right.
that?
Well, actually, there was just no system to be had. I mean,
Ah, okay.
truthfully,
So they were working on something, but there was nothing there yet.
they just weren't making visible progress, right? I mean, it
Okay.
was it was kind of like the old problem in software, right? We're 90% done. We're constantly 90% done, right?
Mm.
We're almost there. And they were working in a fashion, agile was still, it was not new, but it was kind of still making its way in organizations. Most organizations were still operating under a waterfall approach. So, the 90% rule was kind of applying there, where they really weren't accomplishing anything, but they were telling them, hey, we're close, we're close, we're close and this had gone on for 3 years. So when they brought me in, the biggest challenge is that they weren't showing any progress, right? They hadn't seen any progress. And this is what I've found is mostly the biggest problem when you come into these projects that are failing is that there's no visible progress, and it's just kind of been dragging on forever. And so like I talked about before with trust, the trust has just completely evaporated within the organization from the top down. And the
Mm.
team doesn't trust one another. They're not wanting to, potentially take blame for any problems. The product owners don't want to make decisions. It's just a complete breakdown in that trust. So, what I found is that when you come into these types of situations, number one, you have to, focus on that product vision, assess the quality of the backlog, and then start looking at why the team is having these problems with delivery. That specific team, what I found is their biggest problem is they had a bunch of developers who were completely inexperienced with the technology set they had chosen. And a lot of companies, this is what they do, right? They come into a new project and it's like, hey, we're building this new product, so it's going to be new technologies, right? It's got to be the latest and greatest stuff. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you're going to do that, make sure you have the people who know that technology. If you don't, and you're taking legacy developers and you're saying, hey, I know you've been developing AS400, code for however long, but now you're going to learn Java and you're going to build with, Spring Boot or whatever it is, right? I mean, that's tough, right? It's a very big jump. And to expect those developers just to be able to do it on their own without, the proper training or the proper help from somebody who's done it before is going to be a big challenge. And that's really, the crux of it within that organization is that they had brought in developers who just weren't experienced enough to do what they needed to do. And they had actually tried to bring in an agile coach. And the agile coach just, wasn't making headway because there was nobody there who could not only coach them on, it wasn't just process, right? The process was only part of the problem. The other part is they just needed help. They needed somebody who could tell them, hey, set it up this way. It'll make your life so much easier if you just structure the project appropriately. This is how you break down separation of concerns. This is how you, do test-driven development. This is how you, deliver, put the automation in place so that we can deliver something after every sprint and show them what we're doing. Get
I think it's
feedback
important also what you said, like you mentioned these practices here, and those guys in these mainframe, in the world of mainframes, haven't seen any of these practices you've just mentioned, right? So for them to learn TDD, that's I've heard this term change capacity. How much capacity does the team or an individual have to change? And there were obviously smart guys, right? They were working in software for decades, but what I'm hearing also is there's a stack of different practices that those guys need to adopt. It's not going to take them a week or two to be suddenly good enough at those to be able to deliver at a sustainable pace, and it's not fair to expect from them to suddenly pick all of those new practices up and the new technology stack and start delivering. So there's this kind of J curve where you're investing in the new technology. You're supposed to expect actually slower delivery for a time and help to flatten that slower delivery with training, like you said, helping with the process with agile coaches, etc. But that wasn't part of this project. Okay.
Yeah. And so the challenge was, they needed a guide along their journey, right? And I find that a lot in organizations, right? Is that if you have the right guide, any team can be successful.
And when you say guide, you mean like a senior developer or somebody that can put on different hats actually, or?
I think that's the key, right? You've got one of two choices. One, you can either bring in multiple people who can solve different roles, or you can bring in an individual who is able to wear those multiple hats, right? And the projects that I've parachuted into, I've always had to wear those multiple hats, right? And it's a matter of if you're good at doing, good at solving these types of problems for organizations. That's really what it takes, because number one, you have to be able to, approach the product owners and help them with their backlog, figuring out what it is that they want to accomplish. You've got to be able to understand project vision. You've got to be able to communicate with developers in a way that makes sense to them. You've got to be able to work with them, pair program with them, teach them, how to build good software. You have to have the technology experience to say, hey, yeah, I've worked with that. Here's how I would do it, right? Here's how I would solve this problem, and be able to implement solutions that they can then, take that and say, okay, I see what he did here. Now let me replicate that over here and do the same type of feature for this particular problem. And that's exactly how I approach, every time I come into one of these projects is, I do that evaluation up front to see where their challenges are, right? What are they having issues with? Are they really having an issue with the product backlog? Is that the problem? Are they just prioritizing things incorrectly? Are they a good development team who understands the technology? They just can't seem to figure out what's important. And I think we talked about that a little earlier with teams that are just focused on technology, right? They just want to build the coolest thing, the most well-architected, technical solution they possibly can all the time. Is that their problem? Or is it more that they're inexperienced with the technologies, they need some help in that area? Or is it a process problem, right? Is it a problem where they just don't quite understand the intricacies of the agile process and how to, continuously deliver the automation that needs to be there, the approach to getting requirements, how to do test-driven development successfully. You really have to kind of hone in on where their problems are and then be able to tackle those problems, have the experience to know, okay, if that's the problem, then how do I help them in that area? Or find somebody who can, right? If you're somebody who can at least identify the problems, you need to at least have the people there that can come in and help them, right? And be that guide for whatever it is that they're facing.
So what I'm hearing from you is if you can wear multiple hats, and if you're the consultant that's seen different areas and has experience helping in different areas, be it, for example, helping communicate, helping building trust between product and development teams by facilitating the communication, or helping developers, bringing them up to speed with the technology stack they've been tasked with. You have an easier job then of identifying these bottlenecks in the organization. So what's the biggest bottleneck you have right now in your value flow to the users? What's actually stopping you from delivering this product that you were waiting for 3 years already, but it's not there yet? So you come in, you can wear 5 hats, let's say, and you can say, actually, let's focus on this thing first, because you're going to get the most value for your bucks here if you change that bit. And maybe, in this, with these guys, from what I'm hearing, is it was actually technology, because the guys weren't actually able to deliver the product, even if they were told to. Even if they knew what they were supposed to deliver, they had problems delivering it in sustainable pace or fast enough pace, because they were just dropped into this new technology stack, architecture, etc.
That's exactly right. Yeah, once you identify where the problem is, I think that's the key, right? To solving any problem within a team that's hasn't been performing the way they should, or a project that's way behind the deadline. Like take that one for example. Nobody thought that project was going to be successful at this point, because it had been 3 years, right? They had accomplished nothing. So we ended up having something that was viable within 6 months. And it was a shock to the organization. I mean, nobody was expecting that. In fact, other teams that were supposed to be interfacing with this product had been saying they were 90% done for, a long time. And even a few of them were saying that they were done. Well, it was a big problem, because, their expectation is that they could say this and get away with it, because the project was never going to get delivered to begin with, right? So when we delivered in 6 months, it was a huge win for the organization. I mean, they and the whole team, you could tell how excited they were about what they'd accomplished, and it was career growth for all of them, right? They'd now seen how we can deliver software successfully through using agile methods and agile techniques, as well as learning a new technology that now helps them expand in their career, right? And that's what I love, right, with working with teams. I love when you can help individuals to be a better version of themselves, right? And to suddenly become, something they thought they couldn't be, right? It's like everybody has that kind of confidence gap in themselves, right? Of, well, I don't know if I can really get to that next level, right? Is that really me? I see all these other guys who are successful, but I don't know if I can do that. Well, how do you know, right? I mean, until you really put in the effort, and you're doing it every day, and you're trying hard. And it's that learning that we talked about, right? Continuing to get out of your comfort zone and learn and work hard and try to tackle that next thing. That's how you get there, right? That's how you achieve your goals, and that's how you get forward in life. I mean, it works with anything in life, right? I mean, what's been your experience?
I think it's also fulfilling, when you see this growth aspect of our human experience. At least for me, and I guess the people I hang out with, it's part of the things that makes your life more fulfilling. So if you stop, then the fulfillment kind of fades away, or the meaning in life might fade away. So once you get on that, and I understand what you're saying as well, because I can think of individuals where they have problems believing in themselves that they can make this gap. Though if you're looking at it, probably at the problem and seeing like a 2 millimeter gap, right? They're seeing like a 1 mile gap, right? Because from your experience, you see it's so easy. It's just a mindset shift, probably. Like even things that might seem difficult, like TDD, for example. Starting with tests, you don't know where to start, or how does it work? You suddenly need to start using mocking. You suddenly need to, realize there's different tests that you need to write, not just one big test, etc. But that for somebody that's done it many times, it's probably a 2 millimeter shift. Just start with a test, and you'll figure it out over the next 4 weeks. You'll figure out how to write those tests. I'll come in once a week and help you, and it'll be all right, right? For them, probably it's like, oh my God, how does the end result look like? Those guys that do TDD supposedly have brilliant code and great execution speeds, etc. I don't believe it's even possible, right?
Right.
Yeah, I wish there was more people helping people like you are, not only in um, the technology space or process space, but also on an individual level, right? Like approaching it from hey, we're all the same here. Let's do it together, and well, we might make some mistakes, but I've seen this work, so why not, right?
Yeah.
And then you actually come into a project that's been 3 years behind, and in 6 months, everybody's surprised because it's working. So this miracle actually happens,
Yeah.
and
And
it
I mean,
wasn't
that's,
in a week, right? It wasn't in a week or 2 weeks because there
yeah,
was a baggage of things that had to be solved.
right.
But what I'm hearing from you, eventually the company's happy actually, and they're
Yeah.
really they're generating value to the clients. The guys, all the individuals develop their careers. Plus, the company's got a new product and they can offer it to their customers and generate more revenue to probably hire more developers, and these guys now become senior and train more staff, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, building people within your organization is critical, right? I mean, if you don't have that focus of trying to lift people up and have them grow as an individual, you're going to stagnate. I mean, your organization is only as good as the people that work within it, right? I mean, that's really your firepower within the organization to get better. And so if you're not focused on that of saying, hey, I want people to learn and I want people to grow, and here I want to get them the help they need, the guide they need to grow in that area, it's a big mistake. And that's really my sales pitch a lot of times to companies is that, having that kind of guide, someone who can come in and be able to show them, hey, look, if you just do this, you'll get over that threshold, right? You'll suddenly be more productive or be delivering better or, creating more value or whatever it is that they need to do within the organization. If you can get there, all of a sudden, it's a huge boon for your organization, right? You create much more, there's always this, everybody talks about 10 times developers, right? Who's a 10x developer? You always hear about this. Well, 10x developers are those folks who they have gotten over that threshold, right? They're either just like really, they're good with the technology, and they also have the business acumen, and they have the ability to communicate, right? You have to have all three. You have to be good at technology, you have to have business acumen, and you have to be able to communicate well with the business in order to be this, supposed 10x developer. And you can have all kinds of those within your organization, these 10x guys that are super good. But the key is you have to give them the guidance they need to be able to accomplish all three of those things. Because if they're only good in one area, they're not going to succeed, right? It's really difficult to be a great developer until you're good at all three of those things. And the deficiency generally comes in one of those areas with teams, and you just have to figure out which of those areas they need to focus on.
If you're great at technology and just great at technology, the best thing you can produce is great technology.
That's right.
We're not talking about, there's no user experience in that equation, right? Suddenly, when you start talking to product people, for example, and you've got the communication skills, and maybe they have a bit how to talk to developers as well, right? They've built this common language. Suddenly, you've got two inputs to your function if you're a developer, right? And you can produce something that's great technology plus a great product because you're communicating with the product people. And then you can add the other ones you're talking about, and suddenly you've got this all-rounded developer that can deliver value to customers, not just a great piece of technology. That makes sense.
Right. And these developers are extremely productive at that point, right? I mean, you'd be surprised how taking this guy you talked about before, the guys that are just purely technical, they're just focused on the best architecture and the best technologies, the latest.
I feel for those guys, because I used to be that guy, right? And I used to be, I used to love TDD. I used to love hexagonal architecture. I used to love those things. And, I just realized after 10 years of doing that, right? I was like, there's other ways you can be better. Right. Yeah. And then you come into the communication patterns, how you develop, relationships with people and trust with people, etc. And I guess what we're saying here is maybe if somebody's listening to this, they'll realize earlier in their journey that there's some other things that they can look at and how to get better as a software developer. Software development is not just about writing those lines of code, it's knowing which lines to write, and that involves talking to people and understanding the business language, etc.
Yeah, soft skills, right? Everybody talks about soft skills, and
soft skills are hard. I've seen that on LinkedIn recently.
So, some tips real quick for guys, some, like you said, somebody that might be watching this, if you have never done it, first off, I say start with writing articles about the things that you're learning, right? Start up a blog or go on to Medium, right? Medium is a great place to create. All you got to do is create an account, and then you can start writing about whatever, right? Try to explain things that you're learning to other people. It helps with your ability to communicate. So if I have to go in and, take what I've learned and I think that I know something, and then I have to create a tutorial about it, or I have to debate one way or the other that this thing is good versus, technology X is good against technology Y. That's a tough thing to do, right? It's a lot harder than you think it is until you actually sit down and try to write something. And then all of a sudden you realize, okay, well, maybe I am a little better at communicating now than I thought, because I've been writing all of this stuff, and some of it's actually pretty good. And some people have had some interest in it. Maybe you've got some followers, maybe you've posted it out to some, an important site that publishes articles or whatever it is. And, you're starting to make some headway. Well, then start thinking about doing presentations. And this is actually pretty easy to do because there's local user groups everywhere, or you can do one online, right? Through, a user group online, whatever the case may be. Just find one that you can do a presentation for. And you can either do it remotely, do it in person. I actually tend to prefer the ones that are in person because I think it's, it number one brings up those butterflies that you get every time that you have to present in front of anyone. And I think it's good to get used to that feeling, right? You need that confidence, that ability to push through whenever you get that nervousness that's going to, inevitably build, and be able to get past that and then have success, right? And you may stumble.
It's a practicing ground for what you said earlier, which is those conversations with product owners, let's say, right? You're going to go to a team that don't know your language, and you're going to have to explain to them in person, not online, right?
That's absolutely right. And that's the thing, is that by doing this, by number one, writing, and number two, going out and doing presentations, you will build those soft skills, whether you know it or not, right? You may not even realize they're happening, but they will. And all of a sudden, especially like whenever people are asking you questions, I love that at the end of presentations, right? When people start asking questions and you're having to, on the fly, kind of, come up with responses, appropriate responses, gauge their interest, all those things. It's great, right? It's great for those kind of conversations with stakeholders, because that's what's going to happen, right? They're going to be quizzing you. They're going to be trying to think of your, you got to come up with ideas on the spot that meet the demands of their questions. So, for anybody that's out there that might be thinking about, how can I do this, right? How can I get better? Those are the two biggest things I would recommend to start with. And it's not only helpful for you, it's helpful to others as well. So you can see it as giving back to the community as well, because you're teaching them something that they may not know, right? So whether you're writing about, something that you learn, or you're going out and doing a presentation, others are benefiting from that, right? And they say, oh, okay, well, maybe I should start looking into that. Maybe I should learn that so I can grow my career as well. So it's good for both. It's good for you, and it's also giving back to the community.
I think it's an important point as well, the last point you made here, that what I've noticed is a lot of developers or architects, etc., they sit on a mountain of experience and knowledge they've built on top over the years, and to them it looks like, once you're sitting on top of that mountain, you don't see the mountain you've just climbed over the last 10 years, right? And they think it's just normal. They think everybody has the same issues they have, everybody knows what they've already learned, etc. And for example, from my business point of view, we tend to help customers where the knowledge gap is high, right? So we can deliver the most value to customers where the knowledge gap is the highest. So I often speak to customers and teams that are early in their journey of, let's say, API virtualization, API simulation, test automation, etc., right? And the questions they ask are like, you realize suddenly that, oh dear, yes, you're right. This is a very important question. I used to ask myself 9 years ago, right? And those guys, need help. And for me, it's so easy, right? And you can deliver so much value because with one sentence you solve a lot of their problems just because you've been doing it for so long. And to you it might look like it's a no-brainer, but you know, there's a lot of people that actually are starting their journey, and it took you 10 years, or in your case 20 years, or somebody else's case, you know, 3 years maybe, to figure something out. And that's not obvious to somebody else.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing is, you know, everybody who's in that, the longer you've spent in the industry, you realize, you know, you didn't know what you didn't know, right? And that's the biggest problem, is that whenever you first start out in technology, you just don't know what you don't know. And then over time you realize, okay, you know, now I'm starting to get it, right? If I you know, work in this area, I'll improve my soft skills. If I work in this area, I'll improve my technical skills. And then you dive a little deeper and you understand the inner workings of things behind the scenes, but all of it just takes time. I mean, it's a learning process, and it takes a lot of experience to get there, to, you know, climb that mountain, as you said. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it over time.
Um, I know we said we're going to be finishing soon, but I'm enjoying this conversation. So if you've got 15 minutes more, I'm happy to continue. If you gotta finish, you know, we can cut here as well. Up to you,
No,
Jacob.
I cleared my schedule. I'm Central Time. You know, I've got time before lunch, so we're good.
Awesome. Yeah, so I was actually curious. We talked about this project where the organization, or I'm guessing architects or somebody, you know, that's in the technology department, but a bit higher up, decided that they're going to use this new stack. And I heard the Java stack. So my question to you would be, like a two-folded question. First of all, what would you have done in that project if you could go back and be one of those people that decided what is the tech stack, or would you even decide on the tech stack? What else would you do? And the second question I would have is, how would you approach evaluating new technologies, not as a, let's say, let's rebuild the system, it's going to take a few years, but individual bits, let's say we need this capability in our software team or our product team. How do we evaluate these 5 tools, and how do we choose one of them to fulfill our needs?
Sure. Yeah. So the first part, you talked about getting started, right? And where do we start when we're looking at a new technology stack? And what would I have done in that situation with the organization? So if you're getting started on a new technology, my first recommendation is if you can, bring in somebody who's an expert at this, right? A consultant. And the reason why I say this is because within an organization, you just, again, you don't know what you don't know. And what you're trying to do is evaluate all these, you know, potential technologies that can meet your needs without any knowledge about any of those technologies. Now, if you can bring in somebody who's a consultant that has done this and worked with a variety of technologies in the past and knows the latest and greatest things, they're going to have a better time being able to evaluate your situation based on, you know, the information you provide them, and help you make a good decision. Now, if you can't do that, I can give you some tips and tricks on what the best approach is for evaluating technologies up front. Now, it's a bit of a lengthy process, especially if you don't know anything about the technologies, and it will take some time, which is why I recommend a consultant. But if you head down that path, the best thing to do is start to look at the 8 different things that I tend to focus on. Number 1 is industry adoption. So you need to be looking at things like job boards, you know, backing from large companies, how many downloads something has, you know, how prevalent is the technology within the industry. I think that's the number 1 focus that you need to do for every technology that you're considering. So if you're looking at a tech stack, start looking there, because number 1, with job boards, you need to make sure that, you know, you can find developers, right? So yes, your company may be working with this thing, but can you really hire other people? If a developer leaves, what are you going to do? Can you find somebody for a reasonable price? It all comes down to supply and demand for developers at that point. And unless it's pretty widely adopted, you're going to have a problem finding people. The other problem is that if there's not a lot of industry adoption, what about abandonment, right? What do you have to worry about over time? Is this software going to be around, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whenever we need support for this? Is it going to be something that we can get that support and have the help we need? Number two, licensing terms, right? I tend to prefer open source technologies. There's also, freemium, paid support, proprietary. A lot of open source technologies these days do have a paid support option, so that you can, get on the open source product and then have an actual backing company that will help you out if you need it, assuming you're paying for the monthly support fees. But really, the great thing about open source technologies, and they've become more and more prevalent over time. They were just kind of getting started whenever I first started my career. But the great thing about them is that you can dive in, right? If there's a problem, you can always look and see if you can solve that problem yourself first, or it's much easier to understand the technology because you can dive in and say, okay, I see what it's doing here and what I'm doing wrong, right? You have that ability. Whereas, if it's something proprietary where the code is hidden behind the scenes, you don't really know. You're kind of at the mercy of whoever provides that product to giving you an answer of why you're getting this error code, or what the problem might be behind the scenes and where their bug is at. Is it a bug within their system? You just don't know, and you're kind of at their mercy for that. And it's all dependent on their documentation, and that's my number three. Documentation, if something doesn't have documentation, forget about it. I mean, it's not even worth using. These days, you're expecting documentation to be detailed, well written, easy to follow. It needs to be good, right? Don't even consider a product that doesn't have good documentation, because it's going to be very difficult for you to use that product over time. And also to, whenever you get to new features, how do I do that? You need to be able to refer to something to be able to understand it. Number four is ease of use. So this comes from building a proof of concept. The great thing about Ring and a consultant is they've probably built things before, so they can build you a proof of concept pretty quickly if you want to see one for the technology within your organization solving one of your specific features. But always build a proof of concept with the tech stack to make sure that it meets the needs of what your organization is trying to do, and also, to make sure that you like it. Right? I mean, do the developers within the organization actually think that this thing is usable and user-friendly, right? The technology used should be, we always talk about UXs and, hey, is the UX user-friendly? Well, the technology you're using should also be user-friendly, right? It should be something that I want to develop in, not something that requires me to create a whole bunch of boilerplate code and, it's a nightmare to work with because the APIs are always failing, whatever the case may be. So consider that as well. Community support is number five. There needs to be a community there advising, answering questions. Look on Stack Overflow. Are there people out there constantly, responding to you if you were to have a query about something? You need to be able to Google it, right? You need to be able to find out, hey, if I have a problem, can I solve it? Can I get answers out here? Number six is feature mapping. And this really comes down to mapping out what your expected needs are from the technology for capabilities, security, et cetera. Does the technology really support them? You need to figure that out. And that's key to knowing whether this technology is going to meet your needs today and also in the future. Number seven, scalability. This is really around, will the technology meet the performance needs we have now and in the foreseeable future? And if it's not going to meet those needs, you probably want to consider something else. If you're expecting a user base, take a look at ChatGPT, right? They had 100 million users within a month, 2 months, whatever it was, the fastest run up to that many users in history. If they hadn't built that product for scalability and considered it up front, they would have failed day one. I mean, that'd be a huge problem for them. So look at, what your user base is considered to be and make sure that the technology that you're building on is going to be able to scale out to that in the future. That's key. And then number eight, and my final
I think
one.
just one point on number seven. I think it's what I've seen on top of the performance of the tool itself is scalability across the teams. I don't know if you've had that experience as well. So where there's going to be 5 people on the team that can pick up the tool, but once you start talking to the rest, 95 of them, they're like, this is so far from where you were used to. Let's choose a different tool, actually, right? So not just the performance, but also scaling across the organization and many teams. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, if you can't get buy-in from every team and try to standardize the technology set that you're using, you're going to have disparate technologies across the organization, and that creates a problem in itself. It's not
So
that
what's your experience with that? Like different technologies and different teams. We've got this notion of the self-organizing teams right now. One team is using Ruby on Rails, the next one's using Java, the next one's using, I don't know, Perl, right? Unlikely, but let's say, right? And those are totally different stacks. It's not just about the programming language, it's the whole architecture of how you write tests, how you deploy it. How does the virtual machine, if there is one, work and performance? How do you configure that, etc. Right? This is 5 years of knowledge that you need to build up, or 3 years of knowledge you need to build up to be proficient enough to run something in production, to be able to scale to, let's say, in case of ChatGPT, to 100 million users, right? So what's your experience with that? How do you tackle that problem?
Yeah. So my opinion on that is the larger the organization, the less of a problem, right? So if your organization is fairly small, let's say your organization is 200 to 500 people, it's very difficult to be able to manage that whenever you have multiple technology sets that you're working with, technology stacks. But if you're an organization like Amazon, it's not that big of a deal. You've got so many people working within that organization and so many disparate teams that having those different technology stacks is not going to create the same kind of problems it would within a smaller organization. So within a smaller organization, you have to think about things like creating silos, right? Silos of knowledge. And if you're working with different technology stacks, those silos are going to be very, not necessarily, but mostly well defined, right? You're suddenly going to have, okay, this team only works on this product because they know these technologies, right? And this team only works on this product because they know these technologies. And so it's very difficult to have knowledge sharing across the organization because developers want to work with what they're familiar with. And it's not that they can't learn those technologies, but it's an impediment to that, right? And they could potentially get over there, but they may not get proficient with working in that space. And so you may inadvertently create silos of knowledge within the organization. And that those silos aren't necessarily just technology understanding silos, it's all understanding silos. It's also silos of business knowledge, right? So I don't know, maybe I work with the customer service systems and you work with the technician systems, and we work on totally different technology sets. Well, I don't know anything about how the technicians work or what they do or how that part of the business works. I only work within customer service. And so now if a question comes up within customer service that might also be solvable by something that's also been done on your side, I have no knowledge of that. I have no understanding. And I also can't help to make my system more proficient in solving problems that might exist on your end, right? Because I just, it's a silo of knowledge. And so my recommendation is stick to a single technology stack across the organization. Find one that works for everybody, that you've got buy-in across the board and you've made it simple to use across the board. And I think that's a key thing too, is that whenever you choose a technology stack, either one, you have to choose one that's very easy to use, or you have to make it easy to use. And it might be a combination of two things there, right? So whenever you build something with that technology, you may build your own in-house DSL, a domain specific language, or a framework around that technology that makes it very simple to create the kind of applications your company creates with that technology. And that's key, right? I mean, you want developers when they come in, everything to make sense, right? Where do I put models and where do I put services and how do are we using REST APIs? Those decisions, quit making developers make decisions all the time, right? The fewer decisions that they have to make along the way, and I'm not saying developers aren't good at making decisions. We have to make decisions all the time, but
Make the
reduce.
important ones, not the
Yes,
ones that don't actually make a difference.
exactly. Right. I mean, you got to make the important decisions, and you want to you want developers making the decisions that really are important to your business, right? Not important. It's like you said, right? These developers that are focused on all the technology and that's all they do. Those decisions.
Yeah, like the stack, let's say the stack you've mentioned, let's say Java, right? I've seen companies move to Scala, Kotlin, that's still JVM, right? What's the advantage of Scala over Java? Well, there's some advantage. You can do, less lines of code. There's some things that are going to be harder to do in Java, etc. But what's the cost to the organization looking
That's
at
right.
the developers you've mentioned. How many good Scala guys can you get on the market? Well, they charge twice as much to start with, right? Then
Exactly right.
how easy it is to actually read that Scala code once it's been out for 5 years in the wild, right? Etc. etc. Maybe it's actually worth to sticking to good old Java. And, some guys are going to complain they can't use Scala or Kotlin, but maybe overall, if you look at the organization, maybe that's the right thing to do. And maybe the developers should focus on the important decision for the company. For example, which features to develop first, and talking with the product guys, actually this is going to take 6 months to develop, and you're only going to get 10 units of value for the user for this, but this we can develop in 2 weeks and you get 5 points of value for the user, right? That's kind of conversations, giving their deep experience in what they've seen already in the code base, maybe a legacy code base, and understand how to deliver value to the user, and work closely with the product people, and use their that's how they can help make these important decisions, not necessarily deciding whether to use protobuf and gRPC versus RESTful versus SOAP, right? Which at the end of the day, most of the time doesn't actually make much difference, at least from my experience. I don't know what's your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, in technologies, you can argue different advancements create, abilities to maybe build something faster, right? I mean, it's possible, right? You might be able to get some efficiency out of, adopting a new technology. But my experience has been in the past, if you build the right frameworks around the technologies you're using, and you're able to, kind of create or eliminate boilerplate code that developers are having to put in there, and also simplify through component libraries and things that you've built into the framework that you've created, their ability to deliver features. People can be extremely efficient with older technologies. I mean, extremely efficient, and build great software that meets the needs of the business. It's just all about how easy are you making it for developers with what you've built to support what they do. And I think that's the key, right? And it all comes down to focusing on the business, and focusing on what the business needs really are, and building your framework and your stack around that, and creating the support pieces in what you've built, the components in what you've built, that make it simple to support the business processes and the business capabilities that are in place.
Yep. So you had a point number 8 as well prepared.
Yes. Point number 8. Yes. Point number 8 is extensibility. So, whenever you're looking at a technology stack that you're, thinking about adopting, you need to make sure it can be extended throughout the future and support, future needs, either through plugins, modules, libraries, whatever the case may be. And most of the time, open source projects are great for this. They generally provide a point of extensibility where, you can plug something in, or, just by looking at the source code, you can figure out how to, bring something in that you need, and integrate with a new technology. Because if you don't have, excuse me, those points of extensibility, then when new technologies come down the line that you need to integrate with or work with, you might have coded yourself into a corner, and you won't be able to, achieve those needs.
Awesome.
So those are my tips, and I can provide the link. I actually have a technology adoption checklist, a PDF.
Awesome. So if you could send me that link once we finish talking, I'll link it in the notes and the description of the podcast. That would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that said, any other questions for today?
No, I think this was really insightful. So I've learned a couple of things actually, right? So certain things. So I've been in the industry, let's say, for more or less 20 years, right? And you think about certain things a certain way, and then somebody like you comes in and says it's about building, for example, it's about building trust first, in order to build the velocity later on, right? If you want to use the standard terms. And I'm like, yeah, that just makes sense, It's a very simple concept, but a very powerful one, right? And I would always say, yeah, we got to talk, how about we gather together and start talking about how to solve this issue we've identified, or the problem, as you call it, or the bottleneck. But the concept of trust kind of resonates a lot in this area for me as well. And there were a couple of other things I've learned, which I'll actually probably put in the title of the podcast.
Great,
So I enjoyed this chat. Thank you so much, Jacob. And thank you so much for doing this today. How can people find you?
So you can either find me at focus.dev, that's my company website, or at jacoborshalick.me. Those are generally places where I post information, and you can actually subscribe to my weekly newsletter on jacoborshalick.me, or you can subscribe if you want business emails about what focus.dev is doing. You can also subscribe there and see our latest posts through articles. And also I'm constantly active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there.
Awesome. And we'll link those things just below in the description as well. Thank you so much, Jacob. And until the next time.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.